I know H.R. 881 had well over 100 votes in the Congress, but Chuck Hagel introduced the same exact bill in the Senate, which failed to get one co-sponsor. Do we have, how would you suggest that we get senators on board with this as well? None of them, they seem to have all stonewalled this whole issue.
The pharmaceutical industry in Washington, D.C. has a huge amount of influence. They have over 600 lobbyists, probably more like 700 or 800. They have more lobbyists than we have members of Congress in both the House and Senate. We have 535 members of the House and Senate. So, you know, and they spend hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of time in lobbying against many of the changes that I believe, and many of my colleagues believe, is absolutely necessary for the safety of the American public. And I think that's one of the reasons why they've been able to convince many senators and congressmen that this is not really an issue. It is an issue. Mercury needs to be taken out of anything that goes into the human body.
But how do they stand by them comments knowing that this mercury preservative in the vaccines has never undergone any testing? Can you elaborate on that? A lot of times when the parents mention it, they look at them like they're loons.
In the late 1920s, this was tested, the thimerosal was tested on 27 or 28 people that had meningitis. All of the people died from meningitis, but they said the thimerosal had no impact on their dying. And so that was the only quote-unquote test that was ever given. Thimerosal has never been tested as far as mercury toxicity is to the human neurological system. And yet it's been used since the 30s. It was in methylate. It was in other optic solutions, and they've taken it out of almost all of those, and yet they left it in vaccines as a preservative. It's really tragic. And the FDA, according to the studies that have been done and the hearings we had, there's no doubt in my mind that they know that mercury is a problem.
Okay. Do you think that efforts to help these kids, and with a lot of the state bans on mercury, such as in my state of New York recently, are the efforts to help these kids more fruitful at the state level, being how hard it is to get things done in Washington?
Well, you know, I think California has taken steps to deal with this problem. New York has. And I would say to state legislators around the country, if the federal government has been quote unquote too heavily influenced by the pharmaceutical industry, that the states ought to take the bull by the horns and pass legislation mandating that mercury be taken out of the vaccines at the state level. And that might end up in the courts, but at least it will draw a great deal more attention to the problem, and ultimately we'll get it solved.
Okay. So do you think there's anything that states, what can states achieve realistically that is very difficult to achieve in Washington, D.C. besides the mercury with the other autism issues in the big picture?
Well, they can through the Medicaid system, they can help with some of the treatments and medications that children with autism need. The state legislatures, if they so chose to do it, they could appropriate monies to take care of the people who've been damaged by the mercury in the vaccines. But most of the states in that regard would probably say that's a federal issue because the FDA is a federal agency that allows these things to go on. And so they probably say the financial problems should be solved at the federal level. And I would agree with that. I think the Vaccine Injury Compensation Fund, which was created in the late 80s, was designed to deal with this problem. But it's become too confrontational. And parents who have autistic kids and try to make their case before the special master haven't been able to do it. And very, very few people have collected anything out of that fund. And as I said before, it's got about a $3 billion surplus in it.
How can the autism advocacy community work better with legislators to get what we need to help our children and families? It's a very difficult problem. You have to keep lobbying. That means calling your senators, calling your congressmen, calling your state legislators, telling them of the problem, asking them what they can do or will they do something about it. Tell them of the plight of the family because of the damage done to the child. And just keep beating on the issue. I believe ultimately we'll win this battle. But how many
hundreds of thousands or millions of people that are going to be damaged by the mercury in vaccines before we get it done, is going to be, I mean, it's going to be a shame. But I believe eventually we'll make our case.